It takes a second for the recording to actually kick in. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this presentation, Vermont Libraries Respond to New Cannabis Laws, Collection and Program Ideas. I'm Joy Warland. I'm the consultant for continuing education and small and rural libraries at the Vermont Department of Libraries. This workshop is the last in a series of workshops made possible by a grant to the Department of Libraries from the National Network of Libraries of Medicine. So we're very happy that we're able to have guest presenters here this morning for this important topic that just gets more and more relevant, it seems. Our guest presenters today are Aaron Bock and Jennifer Hendzlik. Aaron's the materials project supervisor at the Cedar Rapids Public Library, and Jennifer is the manager of acquisitions and collection development at the Indianapolis Public Library. So thank you both for being here and welcome.
Thank you for having us. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my slides. And hopefully everybody can see what's going on there. As Joy said, my name is Aaron Bock. My title has actually changed just a little bit. I'm material supervisor at Cedar Rapids Public Library in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And she already introduced Jennifer Hendzlik, who will be coming on and co-presenting with me about halfway through. Sadly, my cat won't get to make an appearance at this presentation as she's not very friendly and not a very good meeting partner. The other thing I have to apologize before we go forward is my hair is a little bit unruly. My wife keeps threatening to get a Flowbee and cut it all off, but that hasn't happened yet. So if I end up messing with my hair or playing around or anything like that, I do apologize. Today's presentation will be broken up into 3 sections. The first section will be facts and figures and regards to cannabis usage and how the state of Vermont and how it's dealing with cannabis. It's good to have a baseline before we go on to the other portions of the presentation. The second part of the presentation will be about collection development and all the opportunities that every library has to help support this community. And we'll wrap up with a little bit about programming and what's going on in the near future and what's happened in the past, and talk a little bit about, hey, these are some ideas that we can utilize and maybe build on as well. Please ask questions as we go. Joy will keep us appraised and we can answer everything at the end if anybody has any questions. So the first slide we have here is going to be a little bit about, is it true? Is it false? Is it false? What do we actually know about cannabis? Before we look at the library's needs, we're going to get a high level view of this. And where does Vermont stand? What does the future look like? We'll look at some big topics here. And we'll talk about whether these statements are true, false, or false. So you can answer them to yourself. You can yell at your cat. You can put it in the chat if you think you know the answer. I'm fine with any of those options. The first statement is cannabis kills brain cells. I'll let everybody think about that one for a second. Is it true, false, or false? And the answer is true. Cannabis has been linked to short-term memory loss. It does affect people. Long-term memory loss does not appear to happen, but there does not appear to be enough evidence to back it one way or the other. The second statement is you can get high by eating just the plant. True, false, or false? The answer is false. Cannabis requires some sort of heat and or energy to make THC, which we'll talk about in a little bit. It's the psychoactive part of cannabis and what gives you that high feeling. So you can't get high by eating just the plant. You could just get a mouthful of leaves. Number 3, cannabis is addictive. True, false, or false? The answer is trolls. We don't actually know enough. Drugabuse.gov says that we are not actually sure yet. There are signs that people have withdrawal symptoms, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone has it. And there's not enough research to prove it one way or the other. The fourth statement is cannabis can reshape your brain. True, false, or trolls? The answer is true, especially for anybody 18 or under. If you're using cannabis in your formative years.
No.
Excuse me?
No, it's not, June.
Oh, sorry.
Right.
So what was I saying? Oh, cannabis can reshape your brain. So we want to promote use for those that are above 18 and or what is legal within your state. All right, so we have a couple more statements. Most people that smoke cannabis are potheads. It's true, false, or trolls? Give you a second. The answer is false. Mostly 1 out of 6 people use cannabis 1 time a day. That is far fewer than I thought. And as more and more states become legalized, the age range increases. And so people that are older tend to use cannabis. And so it goes away from the older or the younger crowd, those males in their late 20s, and it's less interested in sustained use and more on occasional use. The next one is cannabis is a gateway drug. True, false, or trolls? We're going to go with trolls, as there's not enough evidence one way or the other. There's not a link between cannabis usage and heavier drug use. Most studies show that cigarettes and alcohol are just as likely to lead to heavier drug use, just as cannabis will. Okay, last statement. Driving while stoned is safer than driving while drunk. True, false, or trolls? And the answer is true. But the thing is, we don't want you to be doing either. So technically, most studies show that the driving while stoned is safer, but it is not legal, so we do not recommend it. All right. Where do the states fall? You can see here, more and more states are legalizing cannabis, or a portion of it, whether that's medical or fully legalized. You can see that more and more states are becoming dark green. Most of these states saw what happened within Washington and Colorado, and they decided they needed to make a change. Washington and Colorado made a huge amount of tax revenue off of legalization, and other states saw that and said, okay, this seems like a good option. And whether they saw the change or they realized that there were some inequities that they needed to do with because of the illegality of cannabis, you don't know, and it brings this, and we're trying to shape our community what is both equitable and right. Okay. So the outlook for national news on cannabis, it still remains hazy. It's still tumultuous. The drug is still classified as a Schedule I drug. That means it is the highest tier. So there cannot be any use of it it's still federally illegal, and people cannot get grants or funding to study it because it is a Schedule I drug. That means we know less than we should probably know about it because it's harder to make money to study cannabis. And this also means that dispensaries are not allowed to legally store their money in banks, and any potential credit union options have been rejected. There was even as 36 states have some form of legalization, the previous administration looked at the topic and the commission came away saying decriminalization is bad and that they thought that law enforcement issues were not a thing. There was mixed messages because he then went on to pardon individuals that had fairly long incarcerations for possession infractions. We don't know what the new administration will support just yet, but there are consistent attempts to change the scheduling of cannabis. And despite all of this, being federally illegal, it is now a multi-billion-dollar industry. And now we're going to look a little bit at Vermont. I see that Jen has snuck a secret Bernie into my slide. I'm just picturing this. This is what Vermont looks at like right now. We can all be right there and not necessarily when it's 5 degrees. I have not had the fortune to visit Vermont, so this is what I'll picture in the future. All right, so it has been a fairly long journey to for cannabis legalization in Vermont, and there is still more time before it becomes a reality. I picture this state right now as sort of the tortoise who's going to get there eventually, but and is fairly methodical in your approach to how you implement legislation. All right. A little history here. Medical marijuana was legalized in 2004 in Vermont. And you have to visit a doctor and get prescribed a card before you can use the dispensaries that sell medical cannabis. In 2018, they legalized possession. When the legislature passed a bill, H511, that legalized cannabis. It was the first state that legalized cannabis without putting a vote to the people by using, and it is going to retail based on, not by ballot as well, by S54 or Act 164. You may have heard of both of those. It was a bill that went into law without the signature of the governor. Currently, the state is putting together a 3-person cannabis control board to help make recommendations to the state and how it should implement legalization. There's still opportunities to get on the ground floor and make real change as these laws come into effect. It is odd to me that you can consume cannabis, but you can, and you can legally possess it, but you cannot buy it in Vermont currently, unless you're buying medical. You can grow your own, or as I joke here, you can run across the border to Massachusetts or Canada. All right, medical use requires a prescribed card by a doctor. There are a total of 5 dispensaries in the state of Vermont that sell medical cannabis. The state statistics are a little bit old that I found on the website. They show that about 5,300 medical patients have cards right now. It does say that if enough patients, if it gets over, I think it was 7,000 patients, they would consider adding a 6th dispensary. You can have, if you're a medical patient, you can have up to 2 ounces of plant. And if you are growing your own, you can have 2 mature plants and 9 growing at a time. With recreational starting up here and what has been legalized right now, you can have 1 ounce of plant, 5 grams of hash or concentrate, and you have to be 21 years of age or older. And you can have 2 mature plants, just like with medical, but you can only grow 6 at a time. Even after all this, it is still a civil violation to have any cannabis-related paraphernalia. And there's fines and penalties are pretty steep if you go over your total 1 ounce. All right. And we should be good consumers and learn a little bit about the products and before we decide how to use them or talk about them. Cannabis is a complex substance with a lot of different properties. There are two main factors to cannabis, terpenes and cannabinoids. I know I get a lot of the big words. And so terpenes are in a lot of things, and they influence flavors and smells, and they work with cannabinoids in that they help each other do different things. And cannabinoids are the different compounds within cannabis, and there's between 18 and 100 different cannabinoids. And they have a range of different properties and do a lot of different things. The two main cannabinoids that you'll hear about are CBD and THC. THC, we'll see, is the main psychoactive component of cannabis. And it stands for tetrahydrocannabinol. And both interact with the body's endocannabinoid system and provide different experiences. So THC is the cannabinoid that gives people the feeling of being high. It requires heat to create this, and it is fat soluble. So it gets added to oils or butter or those sorts of things after it's been heated to create the effect of being high. CBD is a byproduct of cannabis as well. It is cannabidiol. But it doesn't have the same effect as THC. It does have a little bit of THC in it, like I think 0.3% is what's legal. It also is a psychoactive, but it does not produce the same high feeling. It is usually taken in some form of oil, gel, gummy, supplements, extract, or more. And it is said to help promote positive health factors, as you can see by the slide. We don't know if everything that they promote is real, but I have associates that have gained benefits from using it by it being a calming and giving people or helping people sleep and using its sedative properties. Hemp-derived CBD is legal on the national level. Okay, both CBD and THC interact with and are stored by the body in your fat cells. And that is why they're detectable much longer in the future. And just so you know, drug tests may not necessarily look for CBD. They most likely will look for THC, but some drug tests do check for CBD. So you want to make sure that you know what you are taking. All right. As we get closer to 2020 and you may have the ability to go into dispensary legally, and if you're not a medical customer, 2022 is a real year. That is the first year that you'll be able to go buy cannabis in Vermont legally. And you'll generally find two different strains, or what's promoted as two different strains, is sativa and indica. Sativa is known for its uplifting, energetic, appetite stimulator, depression reliever, and then indica is known more for like a night use, relaxing, sedating, and calming effects, reducing anxiety and the like. There's not really any biological difference. So most of the time when these are sold as sativas or indicas, is because someone has tried them and knows the effects and says, okay, I've tried this one, so it goes into the sativa bucket. I've tried this other one, it goes into the indica bucket. So when you go to smoke or consume cannabis, you can choose what properties you would like and what type of high you are looking for. Fortunately, most of the time within these dispensaries, you'll have a bud tender, and they'll talk you through all of the different strains, all of their different properties. The 5 medical dispensaries will have first dibs on recreational sales. But as we can see from places like Portland and Denver, where dispensaries outnumber Starbucks by almost double in both places. If there are the opportunities and the interest, it will definitely grow. And I know that medical cannabis had been slowing, and from what I could see in Vermont, there wasn't much of a sale. But when you only have 5 dispensaries and only 5,000 customers, you can tell why there's probably not as much business. All right. So one last little thing is we're going to show a little bit about consuming and how you might go about that. Shops sell edibles. These have THC that has been put into a fat or an oil or a butter, and then turned into a food object. You want to make sure if you're consuming edibles, you don't consume too many too quickly, because the effect is much slower than if you're going to use heat and consume it that way. The other one you'll see here in the middle is a joint, which is just a rolling paper and cannabis inside it with a filter. The last one there is a vaporizer, and the vaporizer it uses some form of THC inside an oil substance, and you ingest it that way, and it's got a heating element on it. There are more options, as always. You can use a tobacco water pipe, also known as a bong, to help cool the smoke down before you ingest it, or a regular pipe there in the middle. Or the last one is you can smoke something called hash. Hash is the resin that comes from the use of, after you have finished your cannabis in a pipe, people scrape that out and then re-smoke that at a much higher temperature because it has a huge amount of THC in it. All right, and when we do here, if we weren't showing something as well, let me see here. I need to stop that for a second. I'm gonna share one more thing here.
Aaron, we can't hear the sound, so can you make sure that you're sharing sound when you share this? Like when you're sharing your screen, there's a little button that allows you to share sound.
Let me take a look. I thought I had it. I don't have a share with sound option, unfortunately.
Oh.
All I have is a share option. And if you can't hear it, I do apologize, and we can go on. We don't necessarily need to watch it. It was, let's see here. I'll share my screen again. Okay. Really, I just wanted to say, like, if people are interested in a topic, and especially if you're looking at it from a collection point of view, maybe not everything is out there based on collection, and you may have to come in and say, okay, are there other topics? You can go learn lots of things off the internet. You just saw there, it was how to roll a joint. So there's definitely places out there and lots of YouTube channels and interesting places to find out more information. Okay. And I'm going to pass it over to Jen to talk a little bit more about our collections in the library and how we can support these communities.
So hi, everybody. For my portion of the presentation, I'm going to go over the collection development side of things with library service and legalized marijuana. So when we first started talking about cannabis resources and the library's role in supporting our communities, I didn't really have an idea of what other libraries were doing. I knew that we had been buying books, and this is when I was in Colorado, before recreational weed was legal, but I also knew we were a fairly progressive library. So with that in mind, I launched a survey asking folks across the United States, and I got some responses from Canada as well, about what people are doing, what they're not doing, and how they are feeling about materials and programming. The responses, which I've included on the slide, kind of ranged from curiosity to wholehearted support to vehemently opposed. I was even told I was ashamed to my profession, which took me back for a little bit. But truthfully, every type of response only fueled our conviction to keep pushing the conversation out into the librarian community. Out of the hundreds of responses we received, about half were in the library that purchased cannabis positive materials. 30% absolutely did not, and there are lots of reasons why different libraries can't or won't purchase cannabis materials. And 20% did not know if their library did or not. And to me, that is a huge amount of people that are working in a library that simply aren't aware of their collections. And so therefore, they're not best serving their community. So as we started getting out and talking to different librarians face to face, the responses were very similar. We had people that would come to presentations, with their arms crossed and glare at us because somebody made them come to the presentation, to people being completely befuddled that we had books that they could actually pick up and hold, and they would compare them to books on alcohol. Would we ever have those kinds of books? I'm like, well, sure. We have a lot of books on how to build different cocktails. So there's just a lot of uncertainty and an unknown feel to cannabis materials. And it kind of hit home a little bit when I moved from Colorado to Indiana. The HR completely rewrote their drug testing policy just because they were hiring somebody from Colorado. And that was their only decision point on that. They didn't talk to me about it. They didn't look at any, there's lots of rules, still in Colorado. It's not the complete Wild West. So I was never part of those conversations. And so it was a little startling to me to know that that was happening. So here's my stance. I look at the conversation about cannabis culture in libraries as the way we used to talk about things like graphic novels and manga. The library might have some, hopefully they have a lot at this point, but many librarians felt no obligation to understand why readers enjoyed manga, why they read it at a rapid pace, or to actively grow their knowledge to better support the readership. Like a lot of us, when we get started in collection development, I was handed the job of ordering manga because nobody else wanted it. And so at the time, I didn't know my Attack on Titan from Fruits Basket, but I dove in and learned my different audiences and built a strong collection that brought people in the door. Books on marijuana aren't really any different. The community is out there. It is a growing, pun intended, part of our culture. Even Lee Child confesses that he has smoked cannabis 5 nights a week for 45 years, and we really like his books. So our communities need reliable sources of information. And the last time I checked, that was a big part of our job. Okay, next slide. But Jen, you say, what would a marijuana collection even look like? We don't want it to look like the library has succumbed to reefer madness, which is also another actual comment that I've received. My first response is don't panic. I promise that there's a lot more out there than just Stoners Are Us or Potheads 101, but also, we have an opportunity here to talk about this. There are several different aspects to cannabis culture that you can find in books, magazines, ebooks, music, DVDs, and even in online options such as Hoopla. I am limiting specific titles in this presentation to books, but know that the subject areas are represented in multiple formats. So with that in mind, here are a couple of areas that you can build your collection. Okay, next slide. Aaron. Aaron is my Vanna changing the slides for me.
It should have changed.
Okay, it just did.
Okay.
Okay, the basics. If this is an area of the universe that is new to you, it is all going to feel very strange and unexpected. The beginning is always a very good place to start, and there are several books with an ever-growing representation in mainstream publishing that will give you and your patrons a good place to start and learn. Titles include things like Getting High, Marijuana Through the Ages, kind of giving you a history and a background. Higher Etiquette. This is something that's going to give you a guide to, you're always, when you're in a new situation, you're always afraid you're going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. This will help take out some of that anxiety with those experiences. I'm pretty sure Lizzie Post is probably not a real name. The Leaflet Guide to Cannabis is kind of your all-around marijuana 101 kind of book. It's going to touch on a lot of different topics. And then Smoke Signals, it's still working on history, but it's focusing on the social history of marijuana. So just as a side note, as we get into this, you're probably going to see a few authors that are repeated on your resource list. This is because they are trusted authors. They have a longevity in the field. They were publishing materials when the only things that were being published looked kind of sketchy and were only self-published. So those are people like Ed Rosenthal, George Cervantes, etc. Okay, next slide. Please keep off the grass. As we've seen unfold in Colorado, and in my experience in Indiana is not legal at all, but Illinois is right next door. Marijuana is big business, and there's a lot of money to be made, which leads to a lot of folks wondering if this is the right business step for them. There are a lot of books, and I have included them on the resource list, but not necessarily on this slide, about the business aspect, because it seems like that's something that's going to come down the road for you in Vermont. But there are also folks, whether it be for recreational or medicinal use, who are wanting or who are going to want to grow their own marijuana. So this area, when we first started discussing collections, was the fastest growing subsection, and that has calmed down a bit, but it still continues to be popular. Okay, next slide. As you can tell, the puns are ongoing. There was a meme going around in 2012, which is when recreational weed became legal in Colorado, that the cost of Doritos in Denver was going to go up to $19.99 or some such silliness. Munchies do happen, but that isn't what I'm talking about here. Here I'm talking about titles that help you cook with cannabis in more ways than just brownies. Titles include things like BONG APPÉTIT, which was a requirement from Aaron to put into the slides. The Cannabis Kitchen Cookbook, edibles. Edibles are very popular, especially for people who are asthmatic or have problems with smoke issues. So that's a very popular subsection of cooking. High tea, I just thought that was kind of interesting that you can, the different ways that you can infuse cannabis into your cooking. And also kind of one of the things that I learned in Colorado is that as the industry grows in Vermont and the rules change, and trust me, they will change regularly, that this is an area of high growth that you will see flourish in your community with your local restaurants, with your local chefs, as they adapt to the new environment and create new confections. So that's kind of fun to see. Okay, next slide. Okay, this one is my serious slide. It is important to point out that we're trying to have a little bit of fun here to get people comfortable with the topic. And, there's lots of puns going on. But seriously, there are a lot of people that use marijuana to help them and those that they love with serious debilitating illnesses. And I think that is something that we cannot forget as public servants. One of the things that has impacted me the most in my cannabis journey is learning about the droves of medical refugees that come into legal states just trying to keep their loved ones alive and comfortable. I met a lot of phenomenal people when we first started learning this. I usually do not like to overwhelm the content on a slide, but there were just so many books going through, so many that are available. And the the subsection of materials has exploded in growth in the last 4 years. I think there are a lot of reasons for that, and I think you can kind of, I'm sure you have some ideas kicking around in your head right now of why that might be. And it's always something to keep in mind as we learn to serve this part of the community. Titles are all over the place. Cannabis for Seniors, which I think is one of the titles that you got as part of the grant. Holistic Healing Guide to Cannabis, the Medical Marijuana Dispensary, Cannabis for Chronic Pain. It's just, it kind of goes all over the place. Okay, next slide. Okay, on a little lighter note, the wellness movement has not been overlooked when it comes to cannabis inclusion. Self-care is very important, and the ways to practice that self-care continue to evolve. And we'll just leave it at that. Titles include things like the cannabis spa at home, wake, bake, and meditate, how to find your higher self, and high yoga, which seems a little dangerous to me, but what do I know? Okay, next slide. So women in cannabis, this is another area that is seeing a lot of growth. The stereotypical idea of who smokes pot tends to be, a younger male in college, or, a dropout from college that's playing video games and having cold pizza for breakfast. When the truth is, women are also just as likely to use cannabis. In fact, the Women Grow Leadership Summit, they had over 1,000 attendees for their first summit in 2015, and that has doubled as of 2019. Excuse me. So titles are kind of, they're all over the place, and they're not all pink. Women's Guide to Cannabis, Feminist Weed Farmer, High Heels, again, another pun, and Woman in Weed are all titles that represent the subsection. Okay, next slide. This is an area of titles that was completely unfamiliar to me until I bought a book for the library that I thought was a clever title about books to read with certain strains. A reader's advisory is my happy place in library land. I got it completely wrong. And so that led to discovering just how many books are published to complement your personal cannabis experience. Clearly, the Stoner Coffee Table book is my favorite book on this list. Here, it has everything. It has a cat, it has cupcakes, it has space. I mean, this is the librarian trifecta. What is there not to love about this book? Most of the books on this slide are books that can only be fully appreciated while stoned. They have out-of-focus pictures, surreal content, profound thoughts, very short, profound thoughts. Optical illusions, and stories that are meant to expand on your journey as you were experiencing it in the moment, which is very zen. There's one cover that I didn't include on the slide that deserves a mention. Polly Magnus, she's a Colorado artist. She created a Colorado cannabis adult coloring book, and I don't think it really has anything to do with Colorado other than she lives in Colorado. But the coloring book industry for people that are getting high and want to color is very strong. But I mention her because she gave us permission to provide a coloring sheet for you to enjoy, which is also part of your resource list for the show. Okay, next slide. So kind of on the complete opposite side of things, kids' education. As marijuana becomes legal in more and more states, the need for education, especially with children, becomes paramount. The goal here is to help parents educate their children on different ways they might encounter marijuana in their day-to-day life and how to best process it and make good choices. Titles include things like the Stinky Steve series. It is an entire series of children's books that are published by the Michigan Cannabis Business Association, and they've been out for a while, and they really were the first group to say, we really need to get the word out in education and keep our kids safe, and so they created this content. What's Growing in Grandma's Garden is kind of designed to help grown-ups have conversations about marijuana in their day-to-day, such as it's just a plant. Cannabis for Children is focused on parents and the decisions that they are making concerning medical marijuana for their children. Okay, next slide. So I also wanted to hit on a few other types of books out there to give you a well-rounded picture of the resources available. Mary Jane, the CBD Solution, Sex is becoming a growing area of publishing for cannabis. There is an ever-growing body of evidence and products that are available to enhance one's sexual experience from a medical perspective, as well as a pleasure enhancement. So I think we'll just leave it at that. The artistic side of cannabis can be found in titles like Cannabis, Marijuana Under the Microscope, which really has some beautiful pictures, and Canna Bonsai, which is how to, bonsai your marijuana plants. And there's also the practical side of things, like the Scratch and Sniff Guide to Cannabis. This gives you an opportunity to smell different strains before ever entering a dispensary. I think Aaron mentioned they have bud connoisseurs or in dispensaries to help you weed through. I'm sorry, that one just popped up and I just couldn't think of a different word to say as you're deciding what you're going to purchase. But this kind of helps you get a little more information, take a little bit of that anxiety away before you ever get into the room. Okay, next slide. So as with any potentially controversial collection, there can be difficulties associated with cultivating a cannabis positive collection. Take a moment to give some thought to challenges that might come up in your library environment as we talk about this. Community concern and library concern. And this isn't any small thing, as we know, but taking another look at the survey that I did, about 3% of responders have experienced pushback from their library when it comes to cannabis collections, and about 8% from their community. So that's pretty low. The most important thing you can do, and I say this for any collection, is to find a balance that accurately represents your community. If you live in a conservative community, you're going to want to have a huge collection. If you take everything from the resource list and buy it and even more, and you're really excited about it, and you put it all on display right as people are coming in the front door, when people can actually come in the front doors again after the pandemic has passed, that is probably not going to go well for you in a conservative community. However, you still want to have a small collection of basic titles to reach those members of your community that are not the majority. Theft is also an issue. Cannabis cultures books do have a higher rate of theft, not unlike our, sex books, urban fiction, GED books. Theft is a part of our business. We all know it is. And I recommend falling back on your collection development policy as you would with any high theft subject. Publishing is another area where it can get tricky. And is a sticking point for some libraries in the publishing industry. While it is going more mainstream, and you will see many titles being released by the top 5, or is it top 4 now? I'm not sure if that merger went through yet. Publishers, there are many more classic, almost sacred texts for the industry that are self-published. These titles are also less likely to be reviewed. So if one of your criteria is that you only buy a self-published title that has 1 or 2 reviews, then you're creating a barrier to access for good quality content. I know that every library is different and adheres to different rules. My recommendation is to throw out those rules when you can, when to do so better serves your community. Industry organizations, especially in the cannabis industry, have all the connections you could possibly need, and this was not something that I expected when we first started this. They have a lot riding on their success. and they are hit with barriers everywhere that they turn. And as such, they know who is providing quality, solid educational information. The industry knows who the authors are. They will hook you up with those authors. They will, a lot rides on having the right kind of information out there. So building those connections in the community is going to serve you well. Also, go to your local bookstore. I learned a great deal about my community by checking out what the Barnes & Noble down the street from the library had for sale. As we know, everything that they do is based on profit. So the books that they had multiple copies of are stocked as such because their demand is high. Otherwise, they wouldn't have so many of them. And so we can utilize that information for our own purposes. And that also helped me to get over the self-publishing hump there a little bit. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is an area of mine. This is kind of a pet project. It's kind of thinking beyond collection development. If you have a good, comfortable collection that's being used by your community, why not take it a step farther? Reader's Advisory is, as I said, my happy place in library land. But if you've never read a review for the different strains of marijuana, you might be surprised that they read a lot like a wine review or even a book review. They are very eloquent, expressive. They tend to focus on emotions and moods generated by that strain. So they're really hitting all your appeal characteristics, if you will. As I started reading a few, I started seeing different pairings with different books. And we provide Reader's Advisory services based on genre, moods, and even personal tattoos. So why not with marijuana strains? So here's an example for you. The Bob Ross strain, it has been described as like getting hit with the biggest silk pillow and falling into a pool of chocolate pudding. It's a little bit happy mixed with a little bit quirky. There's a creative side to its effects, and with that in mind, I paired it with Sandra Boynton's, but not the hippopotamus. Why? Good literature, and for me, Sandra Boynton is always good literature, knows no age limits, and they are both artists who like to draw happy little trees and spread joy throughout their craft. So that's my little thing. I have a whole list of them if you're interested. I did not include those on the resource, but if you were interested, just send me an email. So, okay, now I'm going to turn the reins back over to Aaron, who's going to go over programming quickly.
Okay, so I'm going to touch here on connecting with our community and providing services that our patrons will find beneficial. Even as we deal with a pandemic, we are looking at the best way to provide programs to patrons that will deepen their understanding and refine or help them learn a new skill. Libraries have focused on many different topics throughout the years, and public interest areas are like cannabis are no different. There are options to continue connecting people to resources while also providing new avenues for patrons to find employment, get medical attention, or just have fun. We are always trying to engage with our community, and this should be no different. We want people to be involved because we are not trying to be repositories of material. We want people to interact with our excellent collections and come together as groups when that's allowable, or do it digitally. Before you start thinking of programs, you'll want to do your preparatory work. This means that reaching out to local organizations, talking to community partners, and just talking to your community in general. What are they lacking? What information are they seeking? Are there organizations that exist that nobody knows about, or that wants to get out there and give information where it's available? They might not have heard about it before. If you don't lay the foundation and get out there to see what people want or need, you don't know what your programming is going to be. But that's just like every good programming person. You get out there and you look at your community and say, hey, what can we help with? Where can we go? And what are people interested in? You can see here on this slide, there's an organization called Women Grow that you can reach out to, or I'm sure there are other local organizations that you can reach out to as well. And we can look at programming trends and see what libraries have done in the past. There are other libraries who have done things, and so you might take some hints and say, okay, well, did this work? Did this not work? Or is it a good idea or something we might want to do? So Pueblo City County Public Library in Pueblo, Colorado did a cannabis knowledge quest. They've invited different local organizations and brought people out to panels to get their points of view. Our colleague Derek Mason learned a lot from the series of panels. He said that the first thing he should have done was get management involved because of this topic. He didn't know if he had support. You want to know if you have support. So before you have an idea to just market it, you want to talk to your manager, supervisor, or director, and to make sure that you have a successful experience and bring people together. He also recommended that he work with different parties and bring different voices to a community gathering. There are a lot of community organizations that may have an opinion, so it would be good to reach out and bring them all together instead of just necessarily only having positive voices and bringing those to the forefront. On the right side, you see Anythink Libraries, where Jen and I both worked before, and they're in Adams County, Colorado. And they did a presentation where they brought in different cannabis business leaders to talk about their experiences. They talked about running shops and starting their own businesses, and this was internally driven by the district, so everybody knew about it, and this helped show and give patrons the opportunity to talk about all the new aspects that may offer jobs, or how did you get into this industry, because there are lots of opportunities that come with this field. The most recent example I could find was from Seattle Public Library. They did an information session called Cannabis 101, and that tackled the topic for individuals 50 years of age and older. It was streamed out, so they partnered with a local organization, and mandatory, you had to sign up to attend. As legalization age increases, so does the usage by older adults, and they have interest in this topic. So it looked at evidence-based information on usage and how it may affect this user group. So where we have been is a lot of information and a lot of opportunities to get out there in the community. Where do we go from there? Do we run with the old program ideas, which is fine if that's what your community needs? Programming during a pandemic is extremely difficult, so opportunities may not exist currently, but what might you do in the future? Could you feature craft kits where you perhaps make bling accessories, technology courses that focus on apps and websites and different ways that people might learn information there? Or have you ever considered maybe hosting a cooking class eventually? You could do a streaming cooking class straight to people's homes, and you could require sign up and all that sort of stuff if you're interested in that. And there are so many diverse audiences that there are different opportunities that you can run with. Patrons may be interested in topics like hemp and hemp production, or how maybe hemp crafts to create clothes or do different things there. Working with CBD and what that might do, and since it's federally legal to have hemp produced CBD, you could do different opportunities there. Just knowledge-based things is great, but you also may say, okay, this is a huge industry. We talked about it a couple of times and how it's multi-billion dollars, and so there are jobs and opportunities for people to come into this industry and find their well-being, and not just the fun or the interesting, but also getting new opportunities for them in the future. And hopefully whatever you do, consider to add to your community and bring as programming. You do the background research and you say, this is what I think the community needs, and bring those things to your audience. And that's it. I wanted to thank everyone for letting us talk to you. And we'll take questions and comments.
Thank you very much. That was so informative. And we just have a few minutes here for questions. You can either unmute yourself and ask a verbal question, or feel free to type it in the chat if you want. And I did put links to the resource list shared and the beautiful coloring page. So you can grab those from the chat to take home with you. Can you all see the chat right now? I'll just read it. It's if you had to pick a top 3 books to start a budding collection, what would you pick?
Wow, only 3. I would definitely get one of the Ed Rosenthal books, which I think you guys got one. It came out in 2017. The Cannabis Growers Handbook is a title that's not coming out until September, but it's a much needed update. It's Complete Guide to Marijuana and Hemp Cultivation, which I think would definitely be a top one you would want to get. I don't know, I would pick definitely a cooking one. And I would pick a health one. So maybe medical marijuana dispensary one. That's my choices. Do you have opinions, Aaron?
I do not. Well, I mean, other than BONG APPÉTIT, that's my favorite title, because the Munchie editors and that publishing company is gorgeous. So if you love to look at pictures in books, which is what I do for cookbooks mostly, is look at the gorgeous pictures and go, I'm not going to make anything that looks this delicious, but I'll try. So.
There's a question about, given lack of studies, do we know if vaping marijuana bud is safer than smoking?
What it is really tough, because generally, like, vaping is a different thing entirely, and there are lots of people that have problems. And I did see a comment in there that someone said that there's an oil-free based version of vaping. What I have tended to read is that people go straight to vaporizers, which has it keeps your marijuana at a lower temperature, so it doesn't cause as many harsh effects and doesn't cause as many like carcinogens as you might get directly from smoking it. So I have seen like positive research on using vaporizers, but I don't think we know exactly like the full breadth of the subject.
Here's a really excellent question. Like many things, we are already experiencing parent pushback. Any advice specifically for YA?
I mean, for me, it's a tough one, because you're looking at the library for all audiences, right? And I find it the parent responsibility to watch what their kids borrow and talk with them and say, hey, here's the expectations that I have for you when you come use the library. That said, it's 21 or over for legalization. So what you do in your own house is up to you, and how you handle your kids when you come to the library. That's the danger of letting your kids come to the library, in my opinion, is they have options to come and read things and see different things and see all types of beers. Do you have any different ideas, Jen?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Just like with anything else that could be problematic for children access, the responsibility for that lies on the parents. There's many things that can be potentially dangerous for kids, and so it's their responsibility to monitor what their kids are getting their hands on.
That said, if I had children, which I don't, I would not let them smoke. So
yeah.
Gail, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, thanks. It's too much for me to write down. So I'm wondering,
Yeah.
you know, I've had my collection that we got through the grant, and I think it's a great collection to start with. And I've had it, of course, we're closed now, but even when we were open, it didn't circulate. And I think it's because, and so I'm wondering if how other libraries saw this. And I think that, you know, if we have a collection, a part of the collection that, I think it's not circulating because people are afraid to pull it out, take it out, because it's controversial in some cases. And I wonder how, you know, what's our responsibility? You know, frankly, I was even almost afraid partially to put it on the shelf because of my trustees, right?
Mhm.
But I think we have a responsibility, like everybody knows and says, for information. And also, when we have a part of the collection that's not moving, we advertise it, we talk about it. And I think that is the more we talk about it or are able to talk about it, people will recognize and be able and want to take it out and be informed. I don't know what I'm going on about, but does anybody have anything to say or help me with that?
I don't know. I tend to think of it as like any other collection, and that if it doesn't get used, it probably will get weeded eventually. But like you were saying, like people don't necessarily know about it or might be scared. Perhaps you have a small display somewhere showcasing the best looking books and put it like out of the way. It is also a conversation you may have to have with trustees to say, yes, this is part of our collection, because legalization is a thing and it's legal. So we are trying to serve a diverse audience.
Yeah, I also think that getting the word out to the community is a hard one to do, especially when they're not expecting the library to be a source for such things. And so, getting those connections made with organizations in your community that can get the word out, and will get to those people that are interested in that stuff, and that will help build your circulation. And also, there are some things that you just know that are going to need to sit there for a while until people are aware that it's coming. But yeah, any of those conversations that you have, any communication that you can have, just to get that education out there is going to be huge. I mean, when we did the presentation at PLA, we had somebody completely come undone because we handed them a little baggie that had wrapping papers and oregano, because we were trying to make people feel more comfortable, so they learned how to roll a joint in our session. And he completely came undone because he thought we were handing him weed and he had to fly home the next day. It's like, we're librarians, there's no way we could afford this. Also, it's illegal to do such things. So, you know, there's a lot of confusion. And so the more you can talk about it, the better it's going to be.
I think being patient too, Gail, because, you know, those books went out during the pandemic, that went out to the libraries, you know, so that it's hard to predict now what.
Yeah, our circulation has been extremely rough since we have been closed.
Yeah, I'm starting to see the end of year things from some of the big libraries around the country, and most of them, the print circulation is about half of what it usually is for 2020.
Also possible digital options then, if you're looking for
it's true.
Mm-hmm. Are there any last questions from anybody? We're a little bit over time, but am I missing anything in the? Oh, any last comments on how to combat stigma that marijuana users experience?
I don't know. I guess if we come out and start treating it like a serious, well, mostly serious topic, or a topic that's related to something like alcohol or tobacco, or how we do like wine tasting classes and things like that, it's just gonna go away, I think, over time. It is a time thing to me, where it had been so stigmatized and people were so against it for so long. It's just going to take some time.
Yeah, I agree. And also staff education, having conversations, and trainings like this, just where staff are more comfortable with it. So they aren't going to make those comments that you really don't want them to have. So they will respond to anybody that's asking about something in a positive manner. I always say that the fringes of literature are important because they're grabbing key parts of your community that aren't as vocal. So we always need to keep that in the back of our mind when we're dealing with anything that potentially can make somebody feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I agree. Staff education is extremely important, especially if you have new dispensaries popping up. And I've seen comments like, there's a dispensary opening across from the library. What do we do? And I'm like, there's probably a liquor store right down the street too. You're not worried about that as well. So I don't see a difference.
Yeah.
I think that trustee education too, staff education and trustees might be a population you want to talk about with this, and just be really upfront. I don't know if you had experience with that. And I mean, you mentioned the HR thing, Jen, when you got hired, but any advice about persuading trustees that might be reluctant about these kind of collections or programming?
I think my experience has been pretty positive. I've had a couple of pauses and what those kind of moments, but you just remind people that it's legal and we're in the education knowledge business, and this is something that that's part of what we do. That's our gig. It's been our gig for hundreds of years.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We did record this, and it'll be up on our website at some point. And I learned so much, and I'm so grateful for both of you for doing this. So thank you, and thanks for the great resources as well, which we'll also post on our website. So goodbye, everyone. Thanks for attending.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.